2:47 a.m., the English Channel. The Russian oil tanker Smertus was moving steadily through the dark waters when an unusual signal appeared on the radar. Another vessel was following close behind, and the gap between them was shrinking with every passing moment. Within minutes, the approaching signals were identified as British rigid-hull inflatable boats. Yet Smertus made no attempt to alter course or increase speed. Instead, the tanker continued forward as though its crew wanted the British boats to come closer. The question was no longer whether something unusual was happening, but what the tanker was preparing to do next. Intelligence agencies, including the CIA and MI6, were tracking Smertus with support from NATO surveillance satellites as it crossed the English Channel. Although several details raised concern, the vessel remained in international waters, leaving NATO without sufficient grounds to authorize its detention. To examine the tanker more closely, a Royal Navy Type 26 escort ship was instructed to follow Smertus. At the same time, a British Special Operations Unit moved toward the vessel aboard rigid-hull inflatable boats, using the darkness as cover. At first, everything appeared calm. Smertus maintained a steady course. No warnings were transmitted, no unusual activity was visible on deck, and the crew showed no obvious response to the approaching boats. Then, as the distance narrowed, the entire situation changed. 2:55 a.m. large sections of the tanker's outer hull suddenly began to move. Hidden panels swung open, revealing concealed compartments built deep inside the vessel. Before the British team could fully understand what was happening, mechanical launch platforms descended toward the surface of the water. 8 high-speed tactical boats emerged from the tanker and dropped into the sea almost simultaneously. Their engines thundered through the night as they accelerated away from Smertus, carving long trails of white foam across the dark water. In that moment, the British unit realized this was no longer a routine inspection of a suspicious tanker. They had entered a carefully prepared trap. As the 8 boats spread out from Smertus, control of the situation began to slip away. The British crews were forced to abandon their original inspection plan and immediately begin evasive maneuvers as the fast-moving vessels approached from several directions. Farther away, the Type 26 frigate continued tracking the tanker while maintaining communication with the Special Operations Team. At the same time, a squadron of A-10 Thunderbolt II aircraft received new instructions. They changed course and accelerated toward the English Channel. 3:11 a.m. As the formation around the British team continued to tighten, more concealed sections of Smertus opened. Around 12 low-visibility drones launched almost simultaneously. They climbed into the night sky, adjusted their direction, and rapidly moved toward the British vessels below. The Special Operations Unit now found itself surrounded by fast boats on the water and drones overhead. Every attempt to move away from one approaching craft created an opening somewhere else. The entire operation appeared to have been designed to overwhelm the British team by applying pressure from several directions at once. The Type 26 frigate tracked multiple objects, but its crew could not safely respond. The British boats were positioned too close to the approaching vessels, leaving no clear corridor. Minute by minute, the formation grew tighter. More drone signals appeared across the tactical display, while the high-speed boats continued closing the remaining distance. For a brief but critical period, the forces launched from Smertus controlled every available route through the area. 3:20 a.m. The first of 10 aircraft finally arrived overhead, but their presence alone was not enough to open an escape route. The tactical boats had moved so close to the British unit that the American pilots could not safely intervene. From above, they could clearly identify the vessels below, but any immediate action carried a serious risk of affecting the very team they had been sent to support. The aircraft circled above the English Channel, watching the formation tighten while waiting for a safe opportunity to act. While the A-10s continued circling overhead in search of a safe operational corridor, the formation surrounding the British unit drew even tighter. At the same time, an EA-18G Growler taking part in a nearby NATO exercise was urgently redirected toward the area, prepared to provide support if the confrontation intensified further. The squadron of A-10 Thunderbolt IIs cut through the low clouds at high speed, racing toward the English Channel as the deep sound of their engines carried across the night sky. From above, the scene looked like a rapidly shifting maze of lights. The Special Operations boats were searching for a way out. High-speed vessels were approaching from several directions, and the number of drones overhead continued to increase as they descended toward the water. 3:32 a.m. Just as the A-10s began moving into their operational positions, the assault boats suddenly changed formation. Several vessels separated from the main group and rushed directly toward the British boats, deliberately reducing the distance until both sides appeared almost indistinguishable from the air. At the same moment, concealed panels opened aboard the approaching boats and Igla-S air defense systems were activated. A sudden flash cut through the darkness. Several projectiles launched from the surface of the water and climbed rapidly toward the aircraft above. The A-10 formation reacted immediately. The pilots separated, released heat decoys, and carried out sharp, evasive maneuvers. One aircraft turned hard to the left, while another climbed steeply in an attempt to break the tracking signal. Within seconds, the airspace above the English Channel became a constantly shifting pattern of pursuit and evasion. Bright trails crossed the night sky as aircraft changed direction. Defensive countermeasures scattered through the air, and drones entered the same crowded zone from above. The A-10s attempted to use their GAU-8A onboard cannons to pressure the surface vessels, but every approach carried serious risk. The opposing boats remained so close to the British formation that identifying a safe route became increasingly difficult. 3:41 a.m. A GM-65 Maverick systems were placed on standby, but every possible firing corridor disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared. The vessels below repeatedly crossed between friendly positions, constantly disrupting the targeting picture. During those critical moments, the aircraft sent to stabilize the situation were forced to concentrate on navigating an operational space that was becoming more restricted by the second. Below, the boats continued closing the circle. Above, bright trails and defensive flares moved across the sky, turning the area into a fragmented web of rapidly changing positions. Aircraft, surface vessels, and underwater units were now operating inside the same narrow corridor, each depending on information that could change within seconds. As the boats carrying air defense systems were gradually neutralized, Smyrtus immediately activated another layer of its response. Nothing unusual could be seen from outside the tanker, but beneath its upper structure, hidden electronic modules powered on simultaneously. A wave of interference spread across the entire area. 3:50 a.m. Aboard the Type 26 frigate, the monitoring displays began to flicker. The position marker for the British unit suddenly divided into two separate signals. Moments later, both markers shifted away from the boat's actual location. The automated tracking system repeatedly detected and lost the same objects, filling the operations room with a continuous series of warning indicators. Above the channel, the navigation symbols on the A-10 displays also began flashing unpredictably as the aircraft maintained their flight pattern. One pilot was forced to climb suddenly when the targeting information placed a surface vessel several hundred feet away from its real position. Another aircraft switched to raw sensor data, sacrificing some data link accuracy in order to maintain dependable flight control. On the water, the British boats continued changing direction as their crews attempted to navigate through the electronic interference. One rigid-hull inflatable boat made a sudden turn to avoid a vessel that appeared to be sliding left across the display. In reality, the vessel had never changed direction. It was still moving straight toward them. The high-speed boats immediately exploit the confusion, accelerating into the openings between the British vessels. With every turn, they push several dozen meters deeper into the formation, steadily reducing the remaining space. 3:54 a.m. The EA-18G Growler descends into the interference zone and activates its full electronic scanning capabilities. Its analysis systems begin rebuilding the signal map, separating the overlapping layers of electronic emissions coming from Smyrtus. Within seconds, the aircraft identifies a primary cluster of signals. The Growler switches to direct electronic suppression, redirecting concentrated interference toward the suspected source. Smyrtus responds immediately. The tracked signal disappears from the electronic spectrum, only to reappear moments later in several false locations. Each new signal pulls the Growler's analysis systems in a different direction. The aircraft is forced to shift continuously between frequency bands, following fragments of the emission cluster as they scatter across the spectrum. Gradually, the tracking process begins to narrow. For a brief moment, the main electronic source aboard Smyrtus is isolated and held in place. The targeting parameters are confirmed, and a focused suppression signal is directed precisely toward that location. Just as the electronic pressure reaches its highest point, Smyrtus transmits one final encrypted pulse. The signal flashes across the spectrum for only an instant, cutting through the dense interference before traveling in a fixed direction toward the open sea. Then it disappears from every monitoring display. Only minutes after the encrypted transmission vanishes, the Type 26 frigate detects new signs of movement beneath the surface. Its sonar begins displaying several underwater contacts accelerating rapidly toward the formation. Above the channel, the A-10 squadron remains on patrol following the confrontation with the boats carrying portable air defense systems. As soon as the Type 26 shares its sonar data, the aircraft spread out and descend to a lower observation altitude. Their sensors begin searching for movement hidden within the visual clutter created by the waves and the vessels above. 4:05 a.m. The underwater contacts continue gaining speed. They do not rise toward the surface, slow down, or alter direction. Instead, they move straight through the water, following direct paths toward the formation. The Type 26 immediately turns its sensors toward the approaching signals and sends an urgent warning to every British boat in the area. A Merlin HM-2 helicopter launches from the frigate's deck almost immediately. Before its rotors have fully settled into a stable rhythm, the helicopter begins deploying sonar buoys across the channel in a carefully spaced pattern. Individual underwater contacts start appearing on the tactical display, but the signals refuse to remain separate. They repeatedly divide, cross one another, and merge again, as though they are deliberately testing the limits of the tracking network. The A-10s begin assisting the search. 2 aircraft descend and fly along the direction of the approaching contacts, using low-light optical sensors to scan the surface of the water. From above, the pilots begin noticing unusual patterns. These are not ordinary waves. Long, narrow trails of disturbed water are moving across the surface in the same direction as the sonar contacts below. One A-10 lowers its altitude again while maintaining a safe distance from the British formation. The pilot begins marking the suspected locations and transmitting them to the Type 26. But just as the search areas are being defined, the underwater contacts suddenly change speed. One group accelerates across the expected route of the British boats. Another separates from the main formation and moves toward the gaps between the Merlin helicopter's sonar coverage zones. Aboard the Type 26, the tactical display rapidly fills with intersecting tracks. Every contact appears to cross another. Every clear route disappears almost as soon as it is identified. And beneath the dark surface of the English Channel, the unknown formation continues moving forward. The Merlin HM-2 continued releasing additional sonar buoys, creating an even tighter detection network across the water ahead of the British formation. The underwater contacts kept moving deeper into the monitored area, testing each new layer of coverage as the search zone steadily narrowed around them. 4:18 a.m. The A-10 remained in a wide orbit above the channel, staying connected with the Type 26 while keeping constant visual watch over the sea. Because the underwater tracking picture was changing from one second to the next, the pilots relied on both sensor data and direct observation to ensure that no contact disappeared unnoticed. Every possible route was now being monitored. The air above, the surface below, and the water beneath it had merged into one tightly controlled operational zone. For a brief but critical period, the section of the English Channel ahead of the British unit became a tactical bottleneck. Every movement was being followed from the sky, from the surface, and from beneath the water at the same time. Once the final defensive line around the surface and underwater formations had been broken, Steragushchi shifted into a fully defensive posture. No additional boats emerged from the vessel, and no further drones were released. Everything still functioning was now concentrated aboard the ship itself: antenna systems, communications equipment, sensor modules, and the coordination network that continued linking the remaining units together. Above the channel, the A-10 squadron descended and focused on the clearly visible equipment positioned along the vessel's upper structure. The aircraft identified each section in sequence. First came the forward communications array. Next was the central sensor cluster, then the exposed control systems extending across the upper deck. Once the aircraft were aligned, the AGM-65 Maverick systems were released one after another, following steady flight paths toward the selected equipment. The impact struck the upper sections of Steragushchi in rapid succession. Its signal arrays stopped operating one by one, while the command network linking the vessel to the previously deployed units began to collapse. Across the tactical displays, the remaining signals from the high-speed boats started to weaken. The drones lost synchronization, separated from their coordinated formation, and gradually drifted away from their original routes. Without updated instructions or a stable communications link, the entire formation began losing cohesion in the middle of the operation. 4:35 a.m. Steragushchi was now completely isolated. No information was leaving the vessel, and no coordinated response could be detected from inside. The ship continued drifting slowly through the English Channel, resembling a massive steel structure whose primary systems had fallen silent. The Type 26 moved into a control position while the British Special Operations Unit rebuilt a secure perimeter around the area. Boarding teams approached the vessel, secured the remaining technical sections, entered the control center, and recovered information from the modules that were still intact. Smertos was then placed under close supervision and towed toward a British military port. The information recovered from its internal systems was examined layer by layer. What investigators discovered appeared far more sophisticated than anything expected aboard a conventional oil tanker. Early findings suggested that Smertos was not simply a commercial vessel. It appeared to be a concealed coordination and deployment platform, designed to carry groups of unmanned systems while moving unnoticed along international shipping routes. And if other vessels of the same kind were still operating quietly among ordinary maritime traffic, one question remained inside NATO command centers. Had they stopped a single, isolated operation, or had they uncovered only the first visible part of a much larger network?